Our speaker this evening is our own Bob Nyden, one of the founding members of the Sarum seminar, and one of the few, the only one of us who has his handprints in outer space, which is something I just learned and loved learning, because he's given us so many talks on early medieval buildings, and even before that on Viking ships and how they were sailed. And it's really fun to know that while he has an interest in this ancient history, he has a handprint in the future too. None of the rest of us can say that. His talk this evening is entitled Old Things in Ireland, and he is going to talk on evocative examples of Irish spiritualism and religion from prehistory to the 20th century. Please welcome Bob Nyden. Thank you.
So this is me in my talk. Last August and September, Cindy and I visited Ireland, and COVID had been on the wane there, and Omicron had not yet entered the scene, so it was a good time to go. I think everyone knows that Ireland is a place of natural beauty, but rather than a travelogue, and what I would like to do, what I'd like to do rather than a travelogue is share here some Irish remnants of humankind's efforts to deal with the spiritual world. Some come from Western Christianity, others are attempts to appease gods that we call pagan, or to face death and its aftermath. But my focus is not really on any kind of religion. What interests me is the ingenuity and skill of people through the millennia in sustaining and celebrating their beliefs. I'll go chronologically, more or less, and first up are the Crew Cairns. That GH is a guttural in Irish. Crew Cairns in County Meath. These are a group of what are called passage tombs constructed by Neolithic people about 5,000 years ago. A passage tomb typically is a cruciform structure formed by large flat stones set vertically, which are called orthostats, roofed by more large flat stones, overlapping or corbelled, which then are covered by a pile and make a mound. So this is not one of the Crew Cairns, but it shows you what the shape is. It's a cruciform thing. It starts up here at the entrance and goes down to the other end. And if there are burials, they are in these areas. These cutaways show the way the stones are stacked. The most famous and largest passage tomb in Ireland is Newgrange, which is shown here. It's a favorite tourist site, but it was closed and inaccessible last summer because of COVID. You can't go there on your own. You have to take a shuttle bus, and shuttle buses weren't allowed. And you couldn't go in it, obviously, because the space was hardly large enough for one person, let alone a crowd. But one thing I wanted to show you was this banding of startlingly white stone. It's a product of a restoration and reconstruction done in the 1970s, not universally accepted as either accurate or a good idea, because the quartz cobbles are set into a reinforced concrete retaining wall, and the face angle is probably steeper than what Neolithic people would have been able to put together. But the places that we're going are said to have had a band of white accent stones. So this is where we are going, Crew Cairns. It's about 24 miles west of Newgrange. So Crew Cairns had at least 25 of these passage tombs built atop 3 adjacent hilltops, the highest spots in the county. A systematic early archaeologist labeled each mound alphabetically, and here is where they are on top of these hills. All have been robbed of their white quartz, but many have also lost the rest of their covering mounds. So centering, going back here, centering in the middle is Cairn T, which is the largest one. So concentrating on that, due to the restrictions of COVID, a lot of places were closed, but Crew Cairns was not closed. So we went there. This is what was mostly there. There were hardly any people, but there were a lot of sheep. But getting down to ground level gives you a better idea of how big these things are. So this is me standing in front of one of the minor cairns, which has been opened. It's surrounded by a lot of big standing rocks, but you can see the cairn T in the background. This is another cairn. Cindy is looking down into it. It's also been robbed of its top, but you can see what the passage looks like with the roof removed. And again, we're at the entry end of it. Inside, we could see some petroglyphs. This is one of those orthostats, a vertical wall piece. Here are the three that we are going to look at. The big one is T in the middle, and then S behind where I was standing earlier, and then U over where Cindy was standing. Over on the side, you can see this person wearing a red coat standing in front of the hag's chair. The folklore that goes along with these low crew cairns tells that an old witch called Garavog built the monument, spilling rocks from her white apron as she roamed the landscape. A large curb or enclosing stone on the north side of the cairn is called the hag's chair. It also has petroglyphs on it. There's the hag's chair. And here's a photo that I borrowed that has the petroglyphs highlighted and some cute kids, but it shows you how big the rock is. We got around to the east side of the building, of the cairn. It's about 115 feet in diameter. We could see more elaborate petroglyphs through the locked gate. So I stuck my camera through the bars. And here's one on one side, and here's one on the other side. The passage roof and entry were repaired in the 1960s, but as you can see, the lintel stone is now cracked and held up with a post. So inside access is not possible. Some of the cairn tombs were aligned celestially. Newgrange, that we showed you earlier, has a special opening that allows the rising sun of the December winter solstice to penetrate 60 feet inside to the end of the passage. Alternatively, at cairn T, the rising suns on the equinoxes in March and September shine through the entrance and light up a large carved stone at the end of the passage. And you can see the stone there. So this is what happens on those equinoctial days. The passage points to 9 degrees south of due east, carefully lined up so that the beam of light can only enter the chamber when the sun has reached the appropriate altitude, about 40 minutes after sunrise and after it clears the adjacent hills. This offset of 9 degrees also apparently is necessary for it to do both the spring and autumn equinoxes. So here is the target stone lit up on an equinox. Obviously, I didn't take this picture, but it's a nice one. There are many other decorated stones within this cairn. This is the central chamber, sort of the crossing path. The entry is off to the left. You can see the light shining in. And right around the corner, through the opening, is this richly carved stone with what are called cup carvings. When first discovered, a lot of white chalk balls were found at the base of this stone. They fitted in the cup recesses precisely, and some speculate that they represent stars. No one knows what all the decorations on these stones mean, but similar patterns have been found in other Neolithic tombs, of which there are dozens and dozens in Ireland. Now, although they're called tombs, these monuments are unlikely to have been built primarily for burial and must also have acted as a focal point for a group or a tribe. The abstract symbolic carvings on many of the stones and the orientation of some of the tombs to the sun or other heavenly bodies reinforces the ritual nature of the monuments. Well, we leave the hills of County Meath behind now, but not antiquity, to inspect 3 artistic items in gold in the archaeology section of the National Museum of Ireland in Dublin. The museum has stunning displays of ancient gold, including these Bronze Age crescent moon necklaces known as Lunuli. Lunuli were worn by the elite members of society. They may symbolically represent the solar boat that brought the sun, which is represented by the gold discs, on its journey from day to night through the underworld. Over 90 examples are known from Ireland, and almost all of them are from Ireland. These date to about 2000 BCE. Made from very thinly beaten gold, they're incised with precise decoration that exactly matches from one side to the other. They're about the thickness of a piece of paper. And you can imagine how hard it would be to beat a lump of gold into that shape. Moving forward in time to the Iron Age, we find this beautiful example of a twisted gold torque. The gold alloy used in the Iron Age was high in silver, 25 to 30%, making it easy for the metallurgist to distinguish it from Bronze Age gold, which I guess had more impurities. Ribbon torques are found only in Ireland and Scotland and are well represented in the museum in Dublin. To make a ribbon torque requires a highly developed skill known as anticlastic raising, where the goldsmith uses the inherent ductility of gold to stretch, contract, twist, and turn narrow strips, producing torques of many different sizes and weights. The inset shows a simple double hook joint from a different tomb. That flat piece rests nicely against the back of your neck. Here are more gold torques in various sizes dating from about 1000 BCE, except the one at the right. The 2 on the right were found in a single hoard together. One of them looks much older and more primitive. And here are a bunch more. These others are from about 300 BC. Our last prehistoric gold piece is this wonderful little boat, which was found in Lough Foyle in Northern Ireland, apparently cast into the water with other votive offerings to the sea god Manan Macalir. You have to take it on faith that I pronounced that right. It's about 7¼ inches long, 3 inches wide, and weighs 3 ounces. It has benches, rowlocks, 2 rows of 8 oars, and a paddle rudder for steering. It also includes tools for grappling, 3 forks, a yardarm, and a spear. And it's the only one that anybody's ever found. I think it's fantastic. It's actually on a stamp in the current issue of Ireland. They have 100 great things, and this is one of them that they put on there. It's a closer look. Leaving Dublin now, we head to the far southwest of Ireland, to the Dingle Peninsula, for a quick look at Olmstones. This is a detail map of Kilmaketter, Galarus, and Anrisk, with the very helpful man at the Galarus place using his pencil to point out all the old places around. So Kilmaketter is an ancient church, and where we find an Olmstone. The G in this Irish Gaelic word is mostly guttural, so it's not Ogam, it's Olm. It refers to a writing system using groups of incised lines to spell words. It's thought to have developed in the late 4th or early 5th century and appears mostly as a memorial inscription on shafts like this one in the churchyard at Kilmalkedar. But it's usually read by going up one side, across the top, and down the other. The stone here reads, as you can see here, it's a dedication to somebody named Mel Inber. This also features a somewhat unusual thumb hole, where it is thought that two people could stick their thumbs in opposite sides to immobilize their weapon hands while conferring, or just to show friendship. There are many theories as to how Alm developed and why, from secret writing that Romans and English couldn't read to my favorite, which in folklore says that Alm was created from the best features of all the languages after the fall of the Tower of Babel. These charts show the characters in alphabetical order and also in a sequence of increasing graphical complexity. I have not tried actually writing in this, and it's more difficult than you might think to try and interpret it off the stones. Here are some other Olmstones collected by the former landowner of this estate and set up along the entry drive to his estate. We found these and were guided here by a remarkable web project called irishstones.org, the work of an Italian man and his wife who for years spent their vacations documenting seemingly every old stone worked by mankind in Ireland. I've put a link to the source page at the end of my talk. Here's some other views. This last photo shows the manor house of the estate. It is now a language immersion residential high school for girls, and the immersion language is Irish Gaelic. I thought that was interesting. There's more to know about Alm, and if you're interested, I recommend the Wikipedia article. It's quite a good starting point. Okay, now we move fully into the extensive Christian religious history in Ireland with a visit to Glendalough monastic settlement. Set between wooded hills in a beautiful valley downstream from two lakes, it's easy to see why St. Kevin chose to settle here in the mid-6th century. He came from a wealthy family and was already well known, and Glendalough soon grew into a settlement and became a place of pilgrimage and religious teaching. By the end of the 8th century, there was a thriving settlement, more extensive than what we see today, expanding to perhaps 1,000 residents, including lay workers, religious students, and ecclesiasticals. There were at least 7 churches. Remnants of 2 are a bit farther down the valley from this view, and one is up near the upper lake where Kevin had first set up. There is a very nice drone video that flies up the valley highlighting various features, and I've put a link to the source page of that at the end of the talk also, and I'll send that out to the Sarum members list. Here are some Glendalough sites, beginning with the gate, which is a rare survivor of various attacks and raids over the centuries. This cross is incised just inside. The cone-capped round tower form has become an icon for Irish monasteries. This one is about 110 feet tall, built about 1,000 years ago, and at the time was used for storage, as a refuge, and as a bell tower. There were 6 wooden floors inside with a window at each level, and at the top 4 windows face the 4 compass points. The entrance is 12 feet up, making attack more difficult once the ladder was pulled up. There is also speculation that a more stable foundation results from not having a ground level opening on the wall. A large cemetery extends west from the main buildings. Some of the most ancient markers have been moved into the visitor center display area for safety, but many centuries-old examples remain in place and burials still occur here. St. Peter and St. Paul's Cathedral is the largest remaining building part. Parts of it date from the 10th century, but the chancel is 13th century. As is often the case, there have been many rebuildings over the years. Here you can see a few decorative details on what's left of these arches. Down the way a bit, past more tombstones, is St. Kevin's Church, sometimes called Kevin's Kitchen because someone thought that the small tower looks like a kitchen chimney. What you see here is where the chancel once stood with the altar. So this is the east end. The chancel roofline can be seen above the door. The original entry and that door is at the other end of the building. Just beyond St. Kevin's, across a burbling stream, is a pleasant forest path leading up to the two lakes. A mile or so along is the Reefert Church, and farther, more of a hike, is the supposed cave-like cell where St. Kevin first set up shop. We didn't go there, but we did visit the church, which retains bits of its churchyard, which was the traditional burial place for the local chieftains, the O'Tooles. And there's certainly evidence of various building episodes here, including the massive 10th century stone wall stones. And in the churchyard, a weather-worn standing cross with a barely discernible interlace pattern. It's easy to spend a full day or more wandering this site of Glendalough, especially if one hikes up to the lakes or down the ancient green road through forests that in the early 11th century supplied oak trees for the Viking shipbuilders. You might recall from my talk last year that one of the Viking ships in the Danish Museum in Roskilde was built in Ireland, and in fact the trees came from the forest of Wicklow, maybe even these. Well, moving on. Since we've been looking at early medieval churches, it's appropriate, I think, to look at one of the most beautiful and well-known ancient pieces of altarware ever found in Ireland, the Armaa Chalice. It's on view in the National Museum in Dublin. It was only found in 1868 in County Limerick, you can see over there to the west, by two boys who were digging potatoes near a thorn bush. Along with the Book of Kells, it is one of the finest works known of so-called insular art. It is described as a large two-handled silver cup decorated with gold, gilt bronze, brass, lead, pewter, and enamel, which has been assembled from an astounding 354 separate pieces. There is a girdle bearing inset gold wirework panels of animals, birds, and geometric interlace. Techniques used include hammering, engraving, lost wax casting, filigree applique, cloisonné, and enamel. Even the bottom is beautifully decorated with this beautiful crystal, gold, and silver. Here's another view. And here, even closer, I had not noticed until I started researching the Armaa Chalice and looking at my photos more closely that there's a line of engraved lettering just below the upper gold girdle. I've marked it here, but it's too faint to make out more than a few letters. Looking at another couple of views of the piece, I could see a few more letters. And here's a close-up of one of the handles in a photo from the museum website, where you can see even more of the intricacy of the design and construction and more tantalizing hints of lettering. Thanks in part to the paleography studies inspired by the late Professor George Brown at Stanford, I recognize the letter style as similar to some found in the Book of Kells, which is of a similar age, that is about the year 800. Well, the internet is a great resource, and I found there a published version of a paper presented to the Royal Irish Academy in 1869, in which it described the then newly found Armaa Chalice, including lovely drawings of the etchings. Here's half with my interpretations of the inscriptions. As you can see, they are the apostles, Peter, Paul, Andrew, Jacob, which is James, John, and Philip. And you can see I've put an inset to show that they actually do kind of match. Judas does not appear at all, but there are two Jacobes. Here's the other half. Bartholomew, Thomas, Matthew, the other James, that's Thaddeus and Simon. Also up at the top, I've listed what they call this type of writing, Roman uncial, long, narrow, and angular. But they have found these letters in many of these old documents or manuscripts, the books of Kells, Jerodima, and so on. You can also see that there are some lovely toothy beasts engraved along there, and some nice interlace. Well, I couldn't help but a bit of further nerdy paleography. Turns out that there are 6 different forms of the letter A in these 12 names. So I've highlighted them. Some of them aren't too different, but some of them are quite different. And there are 3 different S's. The one on the inset there is one that's found in the Book of Kells. I should mention that I chose not to include the Book of Kells tonight because I think it's familiar to most of you. I have included in my notes a link to the Trinity College Dublin web archive of their high-resolution scans of the book in case you want to look at it on your own. And finally, here's one more look at the Armaa Chalice before we move along. I wish I had known to look more closely at the engravings when we were there. Darn, I have to go back. Well, moving on again, I return to the Dingle Peninsula for a quick look at the Galarus Oratory, which is very near the Kilmacedar Church, where we first saw the Olmstones. So the pencil points at where the Olm is, and the Galarus Oratory is less than a mile away. I will say that looking at this map, despite the different colors on the roads, they all look very similar from the driver's seat, varying mostly in width, from the width of 2 very small cars to the width of 1 very small car. But here is the Galarus Oratory. It's the only existing building of its kind, and no one knows who built it, when, or why. It's built of carefully shaped and laid stones in a method we know as corbelling, as we saw earlier in the prehistoric cairns, where each successive stone sits in slightly farther toward the building interior so that the walls slowly converge at the top to form both structural walls and the roof. Additionally, each stone is tilted slightly to the outside in one plane or another, so rainwater runs out of the joints. The building is modest in size. It's about 10 feet by 16 feet inside, has a single round top window, though it isn't built as a true arch. This view from the back shows that the adjacent to it is a field of rough rock with a single stone, which is inscribed with a cross. An 18th century visitor recorded that locals called it the Tomb of the Giant. This has led to speculation that the building is something of a funerary chapel for a leading family, but no one knows. Others have suggested that maybe those rocks lying on the ground are the remains of another building now deceased. I said that this is the only existing building of its kind, but there are similar structures. Here's one more look. This is known as a cloister, or beehive house, a form once widely used for housing in remote religious communities. There is some on Skellig Michael, which is the nearly inaccessible island off the south coast of Ireland, long a home to hermits and monks. These are quite large. Some of these are as much as 15 meters across. There are also remains less than a mile from Galarus Oratory itself in the remnants of a small 6th century monastic settlement called An Risk. In this speculative reconstructive diagram, you can see the habitations above the curvy dividing line wall and the religious structures below, including some that look similar to the shape of Galarus. Here you can see the remains of 2 conjoined houses at An Risk to give you a better idea of the scale. By the way, the hedge in the background here is wild fuchsia, which grows all over Ireland. It's an invasive species brought to the island in the 1700s, now widely used for garden and roadside hedges, and it was in full bloom everywhere we drove. Not a lot is known about the Galarus Oratory, but now we will visit a site about which quite a lot is known, the Jeerpoint Abbey in County Kilkenny. It was founded for Benedictines by the King of Ossory in about 1160, but perhaps coincidental to the Anglo-Norman invasion of Ireland in the 1170s, Strongbow and all those guys that Cindy told you about in December. A group of Cistercians from farther north, actually not far from Glendalough, were installed in this place. I don't know whether the Benedictines were incorporated or kicked out, but anyway, Jeerpoint developed into a typical Cistercian establishment after 1180. It has the plan common to many Cistercian monasteries. What remains today spans 12th to 15th century construction. There was a serious restoration and stabilization program in the 1950s. Here's the plan. The tower, chancel, and cloister walk date from the 14th and 15th centuries. The nave is divided by what was probably once a rood screen, with the lay brothers to the west and the choral monks toward the chancel. Along the east range of buildings are the transepts, the sacristy, the chapter house, some storerooms, workrooms, and then to the south, over to the right, is the latrine and the calefactory, which was the only heated room and where books were also likely kept to inhibit mold. Next to that is the refectory or dining room and the kitchens. On top of the east wing was the dormitory, and much of this floor remains and can be reached by a reconstructed stair from the south transept, where the night stair was in medieval times, allowing the monks quick and easy access to the church for their requisite prayers in the middle of the night. In this other aerial view, obviously taken in winter, not summer, you can see the door, there it is right there, from the stairway down into the transept. I might add here that when the dissolution of all the monasteries was done by Henry VIII in about 1540, this abbey had 14,000 acres of property. There's still a lot of open land surrounding the abbey. The adjacent medieval village of Thomastown that supported and was supported by the abbey has disappeared, with only a few ridges and furrows to show where its lanes were. Looking down from the dormitory level, the missing south walls of the church are like a cutaway to show the divided nave. And now we're standing in where the brethren, the lay brethren, would be in the church. The column bases there on the left, you can see they alternate round and square, and they date from the 12th century, 1100s. The pointed arches above may be later remodels. And by the way, that's not a monk over in the north aisle. Now we're at the other end, looking back from the crossing. We can appreciate the beautiful tapered treatment of the window openings. Here's a bit of old decoration. When the Cistercian order was founded in 1098, the goal was to restore the rigors and simplicity of the original Benedictines. So spurious decoration was discouraged. But 100 or more years later, things had again loosened somewhat and more decoration appeared. There are a couple of highly decorated tombs or sarcophagi in the crossing area, featuring what are known as weepers, in this case, images of saints and apostles who are called upon to pray for the deceased. Most are identifiable by their so-called attributes. The keys of St. Peter, the saltire cross for St. Andrew, now known as the St. Andrew's Cross, the symbol of Scotland, and the pilgrimage garb for James, linking to the holy pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela in Spain. Here's the side with more of our apostles. This other sarcophagus is a simpler style of carving, and it has some women on it. Here's a close-up of Saint Margaret, who was usually shown with a cross-topped staff stabbing a beast, which is the representation of evil. If you look closely, you can see the beastie's head and ears. This is the side of that sarcophagus. I didn't come up with the names of the two guys on the left, sorry. Out in the northeast corner of the cloister is St. Christopher wading across the river, including a fish to make sure you recognize that it's water. He's unknowingly carrying the baby Jesus safely across and has thus become the patron saint of travelers. He's also safeguards the entries to places. To finish up Jeerpoint, we'll look at a few of the decorative carvings on the cloister supports. You can see a few in this view of the south walk. The sun finally came out. Many had been broken out and used as grave markers or otherwise dispersed. The 1953 restoration attempted to rehabilitate as many as could be found. Here's St. Margaret again. She's standing on and impaling a wyvern. I read the description. You'll have to trust me on that, but it's a two-legged flying dragon that she's standing on. This is a knight who has been identified as James Butler, the 4th Earl of Ormond. Here's a fun quadruped monster. And finally, as we leave Jeerpoint, a happy monk, or perhaps a haloed saint, with a blessing of Pax Vobiscum. For our final segment, we jump all the way to the first quarter of the 20th century to view some remarkable stained glass windows created by Irishman Harry Clarke. The ones we saw were in the National Gallery in Dublin and in a small chapel down in Dingle in the far southwest. There are others in various locales, including quite a famous set in a pub in Dublin. Here's Harry Clarke. Sadly, he died young, had some accidents, and you'll see why he could have endangered his own life in a bit here. We happened on these quite by accident. We were going through the National Gallery and came around the corner, and this rendering of Mary stopped me in my tracks. Though the term Art Deco was not in common use yet, this style is of the period, and the fully saturated colors and trompe-l'oeil details in the fabrics and jewels sucked me right in. Here's a closer view of Mary, whom I find quite affecting, and of her companion here, St. Catherine, who is so glittery and so 1920s. This window is in the same room in the galleries, remarkable again, not only for its rich colors, but also for the way the leading in the stained glass is almost all incorporated into the design rather than cutting through pieces of it. Here's a somewhat closer view. I wish I had known I was going to be giving public lectures. I would have taken even better photos, but on our trip down to Dingle, we came across this chapel, the Andi Chapel, which has 6 pairs of windows that show events in the life of Christ. I want to show you some highlights. Harry Clark was an innovative stained glass artisan. One technique he used was to fuse 2 or more layers of glass together, then use hydrofluoric acid to etch away some thickness to create shades of the same color or expose a different color or a clear area within parts of a single piece of glass. This was all done before it was put in the window, of course. In this view of the Holy Family, you can see some of this in Mary's orange cuff and the baby Jesus's hair, and in most of the solid color areas, which are variegated at least. It's hard for me to articulate my appreciation for the masterful skill required to create this art. Here are 2 of the 3 kings offering gifts. All the black drawing, hands, faces, drapery edges, for example, was done by mixing pigment with ground glass and a carrying liquid and painting it on with fine brushes onto the cut pieces, and then firing it to melt the painting into the glass surface before adding it to the window panel. In this closer view, notice the 3-dimensionality of the jewels created by combining etching and black highlighting. You can see here, for example, where 2 different colors in a single piece, and here where it seems to be shimmering with the white showing through, or some of these others as well, or here, for example. I think one of the kings has taken off his elaborate green boots with spurs and left them on the floor next to 2 blue bejeweled crowns. I'm a sucker for colors, and these are some of the best I've seen. I love them. Imagine the glass layering and etching that went into creating the rising vapors of frankincense in this, and also the gold chains. You know, that yellow is not all separated by lead. The depiction of Jesus in agony in the garden has 3 striking sections. As related in the book of Luke, and there appeared to him an angel from heaven, strengthening him. I find the angel to be magnificent, imposing, solemn, her wings and gown richly colored, delicately shaded. Notice also the monochromatic filler areas, which in medieval stained glass is known as grisaille, here vaguely floral and geometric. At the angel's feet are 2 sleeping disciples, and in this garden they're surrounded by an exuberance of colorful flowers. And when have you ever seen an angel's feet before? Again, notice the variegated colors in the flowers and the patterning in the cloth and so on. Finally, for this part is Jesus in agony. We see Jesus cloaked in red, which may symbolize blood from the description in Luke, which says, and being in an agony, he prayed the more earnestly, and his sweat became as great drops of blood falling down upon the ground. In this detail, notice again the various forms of shading rendering various patterns in the cloth, all done by etching and layering of individual pieces before assembly. As a last example, I want to show you Mary Magdalene meeting Jesus after the tomb is found empty. In addition to the saturated colors, shading effects, and characteristic style, I want to focus on Mary's hair, which is traditionally shown as red-orange. But such colors in glass were apparently not available to Harry Clark, so he created it by treating glass with silver nitrate and baking the glass, causing a chemical reaction. The resulting orange he then processed with his hydrofluoric acid etching to make Mary's shimmering tresses. We saw other examples of this variegated orange glass in the Holy Family scene, in the halo, the hair, and the sleeves, and also in the sleeping disciple's cloak. I hope you find Harry Clarke's work to be as amazing as I do. I don't know how religious he was, but he was inspired for sure. So that's all I have tonight. I've made a list of some resources that might help if you want to find out more about any of these things. I'll email it to the Sarum list, and any of my friends who would like it, I can send it to you as well. So I'm going to stop sharing now, if I can.
Thank you, Bob.
Well, you're welcome.
And let's see what questions we have.
What month did it go to? So, can you put your hand up and ask?
I have it up.
Somebody's microphone.
I see William Grindley has his hand up.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Bill.
Bob, a practical question. What month did you go? Those fuchsias are gorgeous.
We went from about the middle of August to the middle of September.
All right, super. Secondly, I agree with you about the stained glass. It is absolutely superb. And it just triggered this thought that Charles Rennie Mackintosh and Harry were almost not dead on, almost absolute contemporaries.
Yes, another remarkable artist. I agree with you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And stylistically, Mackintosh never attempted, as far as I know, the intricate detail of each piece that Harry did.
I thought they were so startling when we first saw them that we searched them out. We actually did go into the pub in Dublin where the windows are, but it was impossible to take a picture there. I probably could have found some online somewhere, but aside from inspiring me, they didn't really quite fit my my style of my talk tonight. Anyway.
Well, you've inspired Susan and I to go back again. Thank you.
Oh, well, good.
And
All right.
Beverly, you have a question?
Well, I have a question and a comment. The question is, the gold that you showed, was that mined in Ireland, or is it was imported from somewhere?
That is a very perceptive question. And just yesterday, I found an article. I was reading about the gold content because they had said that the Iron Age gold was richer in silver and so on. I thought, well, what else was in there? And I found a paper, which is 290 pages long, which discusses where the gold came from, how they figured it out. And the answers are sort of interesting. The early gold, they don't think came from Ireland. They think it came from Cornwall. And Ireland actually does have quite a few sources of gold. In fact, it's richer than England. It's richer than most places until you get over to Czechoslovakia or someplace like that. It's a little hard to date the gold because gold is one of the most recyclable things in the world. It doesn't disappear, doesn't rot. So if you have an old piece of gold and you need a little more for your new piece of gold, you mix them together and all of a sudden the isotopes get screwed up and you can't tell anymore how old it is or even necessarily where it came from, because you might have a piece of old gold from Cornwall and one from somewhere near Kinsale or something. So a lot of the gold, especially later, did come from Ireland, but they think that some of the early gold was brought in, and there was commerce across the Irish Sea, and they had boats, even in the 3000 BC. So,
Okay,
and the comment was?
yeah, the other comment was, it really struck me the very first part of how these tombs were in a crucifix form, because that says to me that the cross form had religious significance of a sort way back in 3000 BC, which, you know, maybe
which was
that
BC, yeah.
and that to me was fascinating. I don't know if there's been anybody that's looked at that or not, but it really hit me.
Well, some of those forms are ancient. I mean, it's a sort of natural thing. You've got a long entry and then you want to, you know, sort of protect it and put it in. Most of those passage tombs, I think the crossing is about a third of the way in under the mound. So you've got this sort of secret passage going in there, and then you have places to put things. And if you have the chief person in one of them and their subsidiary people in the ones beside it, it's sort of a natural form to come up with. But if you look at those petroglyphs, there's all kinds of interesting shapes on there, which, you know, we might think, you know, we thought of those, but we didn't. I mean, it's like what the Nazis took over, this really pre-Christian form from and made their swastika, but that's an ancient form, and it's not unique to any place in Europe. Even it appears in Southeast Asia and so on. And the cross, you know, again, it's a relatively simple shape, but you're right, it is remarkable that they employed it. So
and then I'll shut up. But anyway, the swastika that the Navajo have it.
yeah, as I say, it's all over. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think the Nazis put it backwards. It wasn't exactly the same as I recall. I'm not positive on that.
They were backwards, yes.
Well, but that's not.
No, I know. Yeah.
And the Navajo, of course, came from Tibet or somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Originally. Anyway, that's it.
Okay. Anybody else?
William had something more?
You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, the sensual enjoyment of those necklaces was astounding. And I ask, is there any way to know if that was a single piece of gold that they were molding, or were they fused together? Does your 290-page paper say anything?
No, I can tell you that. It's a single piece of gold. They started with a strip and they twisted it. And as I said, there's this name for it, which, what do they call it, anti-classic something. Because if you take a straight strip and you try to twist it, it ends up being a different distance around the outside than it is down the middle. And that's why the ductility of the gold, the ability for it to stretch and move and push back together is important, but it's not simple to do. If you do try and twist it, it's really easy to break it. So, but yes, they started with a single piece, and some of those older ones, the ones that were 1000 BC or so, they're not nearly as complex. And as it moves forward in time, they develop the skills to do that. And it may also have something to do with the alloy that they ended up with using. As I say, the later ones had more silver. I don't know if that would help or not, but anyway, yeah.
Any guess at how long the original piece of gold?
They have some in the museum that are not twisted or that are just partially twisted. So yeah, they start off, I don't know, a couple of feet long, I think. I don't know. And some of them, I don't know, it'd be a pretty tight neck to put some of those around. Some of them were a little bigger, but yeah.
Beautiful.
And Kathleen?
Well, my question is not about those things, it's botanical. You said you saw the wonderful hedges of the fuchsias.
Yeah.
We saw not just hedges, but trees and there would be flatbed trucks driving down these little one-lane roads with chainsaws. And one guy on either side of the road would be chainsawing the fuchsias back.
Yeah, you're right. I use the term hedge because that's sort of what they are, but some of them are 20 feet tall along the edges of these narrow roads. And they have what looks like a great big hedge shears, a big automated hedge shears that goes along, and the truck slowly moves along, and they slice this thing off about 15 feet high at a time. And behind it is a sweeper truck, pick up all the debris, and they just slowly move down the remote little roads. It is amazing. And
It was.
yeah, so.
Linda Jack, and then Bob Scott. Unmute.
Linda, you need to unmute.
There you go.
So while you were talking about the torques, and I was looking for my little icon, I may have missed what you said, but is there a way to look at those torque, the size, and estimate how large these people were that were wearing them? Or are they sort of conventional sizes?
Yeah, I would guess not. Some of them are small, but maybe they were for children. I don't know. The princeling might wear one, or the princess. I don't know. I don't know of anybody who's studied that. Or it seems some of them are clearly quite large. Mm-hmm. But if you looked at me standing next to the entry to some of those medieval things, I was certainly taller than the doorways. I can only guess that they were a little shorter than us, but we've been proved wrong before. Some of the people in old times were a lot taller than we thought. Maybe the church, they purposely made the doorway lower so you had to duck to get in, as sort of an obeisance as you enter.
I'm just curious.
So.
Bob Scott?
Bob, thank you. That was a wonderful talk. I want to go back to the structures, the stone structures that you were showing us at the very beginning. Mm-hmm. And what I'm puzzled by how they could have constructed those. Do you have any ideas about what the methods were that allowed them to achieve those shapes? And what I'm wondering about, I'm going to sound like Rob Bork here, whether there was a system of mathematics they were following that allowed them to achieve the shape that they ended up with.
I would guess no for the mathematics, but experience counts for a lot, and they didn't have distractions like we do, not the same kind of distractions. They might have to figure out where their meal was coming from, but certainly, thank goodness, did not have cell phones. But it's, the actual construction of those ancient tombs is not that difficult in terms of physically moving the stones, because if you start off with either a flat area or a dug pit, the individual stones are mostly flat, and I think the tallest ones are maybe 1.5 meters tall, something like that. So you can roll them on their edge, or several guys could carry them. Certainly the carving is chip carving of stone. It's comparatively soft stone. It's not granite. So you roll it into place, you back it up with some rocks to keep it there, and you find some bigger ones that will tilt over the top, and you stack them. And I think it's sort of a pragmatic thing. You edge these things out as far as you can without having them fall in.
Yeah.
And you brace them by putting more on the outside. And you can build a dome that way. Some of the domes in churches are built that way. You don't have any substructure holding them up. They keep stacking blocks, and they hold each other in. I don't think it's particularly difficult. A lot of work, obviously, a lot of effort. But what amazes me is how accurately they were aligned. The ones that are aligned, the winter one, the Newgrange one, where you've got a shaft, more or less horizontal shaft that's 60 feet long and not very wide, and you want to get the sun to shine all the way through it on one particular day. Yeah, you only have one day when you can actually do that and test to make sure that it's perfect. I mean, obviously, for days ahead and behind, you can get close, but the calculating and laying out and putting stripes on the ground and that sort of thing, I think is quite amazing, because it's not just the azimuth, the angle of the sun coming in, it's the vertical part as well, which is a lot harder to come at.
Bob's, I think I can add a little nuance. In 1961, I hitchhiked through Mexico and discovered the Corbel Arch in both Chichen Itza and Uxmal. And I queried a lot of people, and what I found out is that, like the Pantheon in Rome, what they did was they built a mud dirt mound, stabilized earth, and then they built over that stabilized earth with the stone, and then slowly retracted from the top, so to speak, downward.
But that is not corbelling. That's not corbelling, and these certainly were not built that way. They did not dig out underneath. The Pantheon is not a corbelled thing. That's a true arch.
That's right. No, but
Chichen Itza may be corbel. I don't know about that.
Bob, I misled you. The Pantheon is not a dome. I give lectures on it. It is a dome, I'm sorry. But it was originally a structure that was filled with dirt. They poured that poslia over the top. As you get to the top, you use glass jars and urns to lighten the load. I'm sorry, I misled you.
No, I just wanted to make clear that these prehistoric structures in Ireland never had a filling in them. They were not built that way. You build the walls, you build pieces coming in over the top without having any substructure of any kind. And in fact, you can build a Gothic arch that way. That was one of the problems at Notre Dame when it burned and they got a hole through it, that you lost. They were afraid with those holes that they would lose the circular structure that was holding it up. Those aren't corbels either, but it's the same idea. You can sort of fool gravity by not getting too far out beyond itself. So anyway, okay.
I would like to recognize our secretary having completed her first week of retirement. Evelyn.
Oh, here.
Bravo.
Yeah.
Do we have any more questions and comments?
What's the date of the next meeting?
It was the 14th or something, just a second.
Helen, are you raising your hand?
I'm answering the question here. Our next meeting is March the 14th.
Thank you.
Monday the 14th. Yes, Bob, would you go back and talk about how the glassmaker contributed to his own death? Was it all the chemicals he was using to filter glass?
Yeah, that was my implication. So Helen, were you wanting to make a comment? No?
Unmute yourself.
You have to unmute yourself if you want to.
Spacebar. I was just going to say thank you, Bob. It was fun, and I've got to run, but it was great. Especially like the blurb on the petroglyphs. That was a lot of fun. My kids used to subscribe to, I think it was Muse magazine, and they did a thing where they had the kids writing with those I think it was the same petroglyphs. But I'll have to look it up and see if I can find it for you. It's more
Okay,
fun.
thanks.
Thank
Thanks
you
for
so
coming.
much.
So Helen is my sister-in-law, lives in Washington. So,
Hello, Helen.
yeah. So Evelyn, yes, hydrofluoric acid is one of the most dangerous chemicals you can come into in terms of inorganic chemistry. It's very simple. It's just one hydrogen and one fluorine, but it eats glass. The only thing you can keep it in, well, nowadays they keep it in a special kind of plastic, but in the old days, they used pottery, but it'll eat right through your glass jar and it fumes. So what you do is usually what they do is they will coat a piece of glass in wax and carve out what they want to etch, take out the wax, put in the acid, let it for a while, and then wash it away and clean it off, and you've got etching. But from what I understand, Harry Clark used something like paintbrushes to brush and texture the thing. Some of those subtle colors, where it was all red, but it's a little less red some places, a little more, or you could see the pattern in the cloth, for example. They're not sharp edges on those things. They sort of blend. And so that, and then his business of what they said was silver nitrate, although I haven't been able to confirm that it was silver nitrate. That's at the church there, they have a little blurb about it, and that's what they said he used to make those orange colors. But anyway, I'm sure he experimented with a lot of other chemicals, and I can't imagine that it was good for him. And he did actually have other physical problems, and he had a terrible car accident or cart accident, which contributed to his early demise also. He never recovered. So, Kathleen, you keep changing your flower background here.
Well, you can have
Very
whatever
nice.
you like.
Any other comments and questions? Thank you,
Okay.
Bob. Excellent. Linda, Jack, do you have another one?
No, did I not take my hand away?
No, that's
Sorry.
cool.
No.
We like to see
Thank
your
you,
hand
Bob. That
anytime.
was fascinating. And for those of us who are landlocked, that was a lovely diversion. And I've tried 3 times to go to Ireland, and each time the gods of the weather said no. So I'm going to try yet another time. But
All right.
thank you.
Well, they tried with COVID, but it was, we kept watching. We had all cancelable reservations, and we were within a week of going, and we were still sort of undecided, but the Irish case rates were as good as they were in Silicon Valley, which made me feel better. And the nice thing about Ireland was that they all believed the science, and people were getting vaccinated and wore their masks, didn't have any problem going into restaurants and having to sign in and show your certificates. And that was 7 months ago.
In my case, it was the weather every time,
Yeah.
because I used to travel in the winter quite a bit. So I'll try again.
I don't think I would advise going to Ireland in the winter. We kept track of the weather in Dublin in the paper every day. And we actually were very lucky. In the 4 weeks we were there, it rained twice. We never had to get our umbrellas out. And it was sort of gray sometimes, I admit, but it was so warm I had to buy extra t-shirts.
Wow.
We had sweaters we never wore. But if you look at it now, the highs are in the 40s and the lows are in the 40s, and it rains every other day. So it's not ideal. So.
Yeah, I know. I know. Thank you, though.
Some year. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Bob, for.
Thank you,
terrific talk.
Bob. That's wonderful talk.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
I certainly did.
And we'll see you all in March.
Okay.
Stay well.
Thank you, Julie and Evelyn.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.